Monty once again from DPL Surveillance Equipment. We're doing some chores, believe it or not, again, and relaxing on a Sunday morning, I think it is. Anyway, we're fasting today, me and my wife, and not the cat Lazy Bones, but we're fasting and taking it easy. Maybe we'll go dancing later on and see what happens. But today is our day of relaxing and taking it easy. Want to say something?
Good morning, everybody.
So we're full service surveillance and security equipment people, by the way. We run a business, rather, that's a full service surveillance and security equipment company. We have lifetime guarantees and warranties on all the products. 24/7, 365 tech sales and customer support. Revamped the website so that it works very efficiently and very effectively for mobile, and I think the developer has done an excellent job in terms of getting that website up and running and looking good and completely redesigned. We had the worst designed website for probably 15 years or something. I think I basically did it myself using Dreamweaver two decades ago or something, and it was fine at the time for the time, but eventually, websites get old. They become security. They have security related issues if the coding and such hasn't been upgraded. If the design is not optimized, search engines like Google actually penalize you for not being optimized for mobile. There's all sorts of reasons why business website owners, you want to upgrade your websites and redesign them and get them brought into the 21st century. Definitely some major advantages. We have the largest video demonstration library, if I didn't mention that already, and the articles directory is huge. Lots of interesting articles, including the one I'm going to submit today, article and a podcast talking about the subject, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, the video library and the articles and the podcasts and the blogs are part of the multimedia center, and you can take advantage of that. All this information is free, by the way. Go to the video library, go to the articles directory, look at the blogs, check out the podcasts. The podcasts are now available particularly for people who don't have time to look at a video or just want to save on their data rate usage for their carrier service, phone service. You don't want to use up too much data when you're traveling back and forth to work or something like that. So just listen to the podcast. I think it streams just fine using cellular connections. And also, we're going to be putting a greater emphasis on, I have to mention this, getting away from MasterCard and Visa and American Express. We had too many chargebacks, too many customers who abused their credit card privileges. Let me see. Let me turn my phone off so I'm not interrupted. I want to give you my undivided attention. But yeah, people misuse their credit cards. They would do chargebacks at the drop of a hat after ordering products from us. For instance, some customers would actually go onto the internet after placing an order on a Friday, go onto the internet searching about for a lower price. And if they found a product that was similar to what they already bought from you at a lower price, they would literally do a chargeback over the weekend, not even giving you time to respond or rebut or anything like that. So anyway, there were just so many crazy situations where people were trying to unwind these transactions despite what we have in our terms and conditions, because they knew that MasterCard and Visa and American Express and those guys would basically give the consumer the ability to abuse their credit card privileges, no questions asked. So we're going to turn that situation around completely with Bitcoin and cash-like transactions, where there's a money order, cashier's check, wire transfer, these types of transactions where you can't reverse them But if you're a responsible customer and a responsible adult, you can call the retailer. You can call the merchant, get them on the phone, try and figure out what is the problem with the product, what is the problem with the transaction, and hopefully discuss it like two adults, and more than likely come to some sort of conclusion other than just telling a credit card issuer that you want your money back, and then you check a box, and then that's it. Okay, that's not how you responsibly handle transactions. So anyway, all of that is gonna be phased out of our business model, and we're just giving you a heads up notice. Now let me see here. I think we can move on into the story. This particular story is actually about Bitcoin. It's actually about, what's the title of the story? Let's see. Let's get the formal title, because the title says a lot. The man who solved Bitcoin's most notorious heist. There was an individual by the name of Kim Nielsen. In 2014, he had monies on an account, on an exchange rather, in an account. The exchange was called Mt. Gox. And a lot of you new people, you probably heard of Mt. Gox. Some of you may have even traded on Mt. Gox. But very few people know the full story in terms of what happened and how it happened and who were some of the key players involved. Now, I'm going to try to go into as much detail as possible in terms of who were the key players, what happened, how it happened, and where it is now. Now, just to frame this properly, Mt. Gox was one of the original exchanges, and it became the largest exchange, in fact, with probably 80% of the market share of trading activity going through Mt. Gox. And just so you know, Mt. Gox was sold to an individual by the name of Mark Karpeles. And Mark Karpeles is from Tokyo. And he actually took over the exchange, I think, from a Frenchman. And the authorities really should take a look at what role that Frenchman and Mark Karpeles played in transferring the ownership of this exchange from one person to the other, because it seems like that exchange was one of the worst. The way it operated had the worst security from an OPSEC point of view. It couldn't have been more. There couldn't have been more gaping holes in terms of how it operated. So anyway, Mark bought this exchange, from what I understand, from a Frenchman, and actually there were gaping holes in terms of how it operated, what it did, and everything. And so Mark bought this exchange, and everybody flocked to Bitcoin, flocked to Mt. Gox exchange, and they did their initial transactions. A lot of the initial transactions were actually done on that exchange. And for better or for worse, we learned how to buy and sell Bitcoin initially on that exchange. But Cam Nielsen in 2014 was trying to access his account, and he found that he could no longer access his account on that exchange. So he subsequently lost a lot of money, and not only him, but there were a number of other people. $400 million actually seemed to vanish from that exchange. And there was, just to give you an idea of some of the people, or rather, some of the people who had lost money that basically led to this investigation, and to unraveling Mt. Gox and identifying Mark Karpeles. The debacle, the biggest in Bitcoin's short history, left hundreds of victims. A California man lost $40,000. A Chicago investor more than $50,000. an investor. Um, Let me see. A Chicago investor, more than $50,000. Daniel Kelman, a Brooklyn-educated lawyer who was living in Taiwan, lost 44.5 bitcoins, or about $400,000, and traveled. He actually is the one that traveled to Tokyo, hoping to get to the bottom of this. There's a lot of pictures of an individual standing outside, I think, this Tokyo building, apartment complex or something, where Mark Karpalais actually lived. I think Daniel Kelman is actually that person who a lot of us are familiar with in that picture. So he partnered with Kim Nielsen to ultimately get Mark Karpalais to meet and talk about what happened. They shared this IRC billboard thing, and they met online, and eventually Kim convinced Mark Karpalais to meet at a hamburger place and talk about what happened to his money. So that's basically how all of this got started in 2014. Now, Mr. Nielsen, he actually was I think a computer developer. He was a developer, rather, and he used his skills to start this investigation in terms of unearthing what happened. This multi-billion-dollar theft and money laundering scheme, which was at the very center of Bitcoin's world, shows just how dangerous its largely unpoliced digital wilderness can be for investors. Now, his work, what he called a blockchain archaeology, has become an industry with a crop of cryptocurrency private investigation firms now following money flows and detecting possible crime for banks, exchanges, law enforcement alike. U.S. government agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, Internal Revenue Service, have their own cryptocurrency investigators. So, yeah, starting with Kim Nielsen way back when, 2014, he actually worked with a lot of these agencies in terms of identifying the extent at which a lot of people lost money on Mt. Gox, and ultimately causing major settlements to take place in Tokyo, where they're still liquidating Bitcoin. They may have wrapped it up by now, but they were liquidating Bitcoins in large amounts. The Bitcoins that they got back and whatever, and they're now trying to make sure investors are made whole as much as possible. Just so you know, in the 9 years or so since Bitcoin made its debut, cryptocurrency worth more than $15 billion at peak price have been stolen, much of it in hacks like those that precipitated Mt. Gox's collapse. That tally doesn't include thefts that haven't been publicized or cryptocurrency used in other illegal activities, like buying stolen credit cards or paying hackers. So anyway, these are some of the things that Bitcoin has had to overcome over the years, and which really strikes at the heart of what this case is all about in the first place. Bitcoin has never been totally anonymous, so one thing that this article doesn't really talk about is the fact that Bitcoin wasn't meant to be anonymous. It just so happens that a lot of these initial crimes were indeed solved because of the way the blockchain records transactions and enables people to do investigation. So let me see. Mr. Nielsen was a 36-year-old Swede who lives and works in a cramped Tokyo high-rise. By the way, let's see, let's See, I'm trying to get to the gist of the story here. Because they're giving you a little bit of background, which a lot of us know already. So Mr. Nielsen was a 1990s hacker, or looks like a 1990s hacker, according to some people. Again, living in Tokyo for about a decade. Mount Gox was getting into trouble as early on as 2011. When hackers were gaining access to the private keys and stealing from the wallets. Some 630,000 wallets were hacked over a 4-year period. Again, Mark Karpeles, a French expatriate in Tokyo, tried to conceal the thefts until early 2014. Mt. Gox halted withdrawals and filed for bankruptcy. It looks like Mark Karpeles knew or didn't know that his firm only had about 200,000 Bitcoins, I think, out of a total of 400 or 900,000 that was initially reported. Let me see, I'll confirm that when I come across those numbers again. At a Bitcoin meetup in a skyscraper bar, the lawyer met Jason Maurice, a floppy-haired Hawaiian. Mr. Maurice, who goes by Wiz, passed on the name of a colleague. Mr. Nielsen, who had the programming chops to solve Mt. Gox. So it looks like eventually Mr. Nielsen and Mr. Daniel Kelson eventually hooked up with Mr. Maurice, and this is basically how this all got started. Over dinner at Teddy's Bigger Burger, one of the several Hawaiian chains Mr. Maurice often insisted upon, the men hashed out a plan to find the missing cryptocurrency and leverage their success into a business. The business never really took off, but nonetheless, Mr. Nielsen, working out of his 650 square foot apartment unit in a high-rise outside of Tokyo, nonetheless worked on and pursued and persevered regardless. A lot of information was leaked onto the blockchain, just so you guys would know, from Mt. Gox. So that really helped Mr. Nielsen piece together a lot of transaction activity in the first place. So anyway, Mr. Nielsen working relentlessly, using nothing but a cheap computer, using spreadsheets to record key information, and a third to write narrative notes. He was basically trying to decipher what was happening with 2 million addresses obtained from Mt. Gox. So let's see what else. At the time, Japanese law enforcement was already investigating Mr. Karpeles. It was actually Mr. Kelman who reached out over a Bitcoin channel on the messaging program Internet Relay Chat, the IRC chat, and he said that he knew Mr. Karpeles frequented this chat. So he reached out over IRC. I got on RRC, he says. I got on RC one day and I just started accusing Mark of embezzling money. Mr. Kelman says, eager to clear his name, Mr. Karpeles agreed to meet with Messrs. Nielsen and Kelman at another hamburger restaurant. He confirmed account information Mr. Nielsen compiled and helped him develop a complete list of Mt. Gox addresses. The two investors say he told them something that would become public, that wouldn't become public until much later. The suspicious trading on Mt. Gox was the work of a program Mr. Karpalis developed to conceal thefts by unknown perpetrators. So what it looks like what's happening here, you guys, is Mark Karpalis knew either after the fact or before the fact that there was only 200,000 bitcoins on his exchange out of a total of 900,000 that was supposed to be on the exchange. I think this was discovered in 2011 or thereabouts. So by 2012, Mt. Gox was actually insolvent. So it looks like a lot of us initial Bitcoiners, we were trading on an exchange that either was totally illiquid at the time or became illiquid shortly thereafter. So we don't know the particular state that Mt. Gox was in way back in 2011, between 2011 and 12. So, Mark Karpalis could have been in on this early on because, again, he bought this exchange, I think, from someone else. So he could be colluding. He could have been colluding with someone else. Let's see. So let's see. Some of the other more important things is that the IRS got involved by way of, I think, Kelman and Nielsen eventually working with, I think, Gary Alford, an IRS agent. Nielsen was having a tough time putting together, this particular profile in terms of what was happening. So he reached out and found Alfred from the IRS, because Alfred actually helped to nail the founders of the Silk Road. So he was a key player by way of his experience working with bringing down Silk Road. So that really helped Nelson to make a lot of progress on this case. Mr. Alford, again, gained a lot of practical knowledge about what happened with Silk Road, and that helped out resolve what happened with Mt. Gox. Let's see. So it looked like what really cracked this case open was when some bitcoins from Mt. Gox ended up in BTCE, another exchange. I actually looked into using BTCE to do some trading for myself, but after I found out that they were located in Bulgaria or something, I decided I'm not going to be calling customer service in Bulgaria if I have a problem with my account. So I passed it up. But it looked like BTCE was a recipient of a lot of these coins, and so it says again, some bitcoins from Mt. Gox ended up in BTCE accounts and never seemed to leave. Instead of being exchanged, they remained in wallets linked to BTCE's administrator. So that really identified BTCE as being a prime suspect. There was a person using the initials WME that actually led to BTCE. There was a posting that said, "Hello, I'm engaged in exchanges for more than 10 years, and now I'm starting working with Bitcoins. I can exchange them for anything," WME wrote in 2014 on the BitcoinTalk.org board. So anyway, that's what led to BTCE. WME was complaining about he lost $100,000 And when he wrote to crypto exchange, they said no, this money is actually in an account owned by Vinnick Alexander. So when crypto exchange identified accounts owned by Vinnick Alexander, that really is what led to ultimately this Russian who obviously was in receipt of a lot of different stolen funds. Because WME again said this is a scam report against crypto exchange, capital X exchange, who has stolen $100,000 US from me and refuses to return it. So anyway, that identified Vinnick Alexander, and he was vacationing in Greece when the authorities from the United States flew to Greece to apprehend him. The Greece authorities didn't want to turn him over to the United States for extradition to the United States, so that became a major issue. But I'm going to let you guys read this because I'm not quite sure how much battery I have left on my phone. But basically, the lawyer appealed to Greeks. The lawyer for Vinnick appealed to Greeks and Russians' shared Orthodox Christian heritage, saying they cannot send a brother of the same religion to the United States. Mr. Vinnick has spent deportation hearings reading the Bible, according to them. Anyway, we're having trouble getting Vinnick back to the United States. Right now, Mt. Gox is still trying to resolve or completely wrap up the liquidation of assets that they found or uncovered. And that's still unwinding, I think, as we speak. It should be in the tail end of being unwound completely. But anyway, to make a long story short, Mr. Nielsen expected Bitcoin to let him avoid governments, financial institutions, and crooks. Instead, he and his handful of Bitcoins are embroiled with all three. It's a bit of a sad, sordid story. So the bottom line right now seems to be that Mr. Nielsen definitely unraveled this case. Mt. Gox, just so you guys would know, or just so you guys would know or remember that it was one of the initial exchanges, one of the biggest exchanges, completely held together with duct tape and glue and not very security optimized in its approach, but that's what happened way back in the day. Now, we've come a long, long ways. Now we have more emphasis being put on hardware wallets, more emphasis being put on decentralized exchanges, more emphasis being put on using private coins or optimizing Bitcoin for privacy, if you want privacy, true privacy. But that's where we are now. So we've come a long way, and just keep this in proper context. That's what happened way back when. Now exchanges are doing a very good job of compensating people, account holders, when they lose Bitcoins. When Bitcoins go missing nowadays, a lot of exchanges are being proactive about reimbursing customers. And if they have to work with other exchanges to put the word out and taint coins or whatever, then that's what they do. But otherwise, the track record seems to have been pretty good now when it comes to exchanges and hacks and such. But we in the Bitcoin community, the enthusiasts, the maximalists, we keep telling people only use exchanges like this for temporary trades. And when you're done trading, put your Bitcoins on a hardware wallet like Trezor or Ledger Nano wallets. And then that way you don't have to worry. And if you want privacy, use privacy coins. But otherwise, blockchain is their ledger, it's a public ledger, and chain analysis and some of these other companies and technologies are indeed used to decipher what's happened on the blockchain. So a lot of this is not as mysterious as it could be. But this investigation is a pretty thorough investigation. This write-up, this article is pretty thorough and pretty good as far as giving you a background in terms of where we come from and I'm telling you where we are now. So anyway, that's an overall 30,000 foot view of where Bitcoin has come from with the introduction of Mount Gox way back when, and then going all the way up to Coinbase where we are now, which has fiduciary services. Other big players are getting into, the same thing, holding your Bitcoin, giving you insurance, giving you all sorts of protections. But ultimately, you want to look into your holding your Bitcoin through Ledger Nano and Treasure wallets. That's the ultimate in security for your Bitcoins. So anyway, as we like to say at the conclusion of every podcast, and I'm going to include the specific article in along with the podcast, and so you guys can see the details for yourself. But yeah, as we like to say at the conclusion of every podcast, stay safe out there, keep your eyes and ears open, and take care and have a great day. Thanks, take care, bye.